The wind howled mournfully through the dense woods surrounding the quiet town of Mapleton. Nestled in the heart of this sea of trees was one dilapidated diner that clung to life obstinately. It was here that the tale began to unfold, beneath the dim lights, amidst hushed conversations. Jake, our protagonist with his city-reared nature and genes as worn out as the gravel roads of Mapleton, sauntered into the diner right around sunset. With familiar city life structures hidden miles away, he felt like a fish out of water. Jake had always been the curious type, an adrenaline junkie. New cities, forgotten towns, and hidden landscapes excited him, their mysteries calling out to him like a moth to a flame. Mapleton, however, was not a stop dictated by thrill-seeking alone. The town held a chilling secret, and Jake was inadvertently about to become part of its conspicuous legend. As he sidled up to the diner's counter, he found a scattering of locals partaking in what likely was the best coffee within miles. These were older folks, their faces etched with a lifetime of rural living, wind-roughened skin and eyes that had seen enough seasons come and go to know the land like the creases in their worn hands. As they cradled their mugs and leaned closer, voices dropped to a whisper, and it was then that Jake heard the tales. Tales of an ethereal woman named Clara, whose laughter was said to echo through the misty woods in the depth of night. Some spoke of mysterious voices and footsteps heard in the velvety silence of the otherwise lifeless woods. Attempts to suppress a smirk went unheeded as Jake ran his fingers through his jet-black hair. A ghost in this century? The word echo bumbled from his lips in a slight chuckle, stirring up a cauldron of uncomfortable shuffling among the locals. It was Old Man Harold, a man as ancient as the time-worn logs of Maplewood, who finally broke the tension. "Don't go judging what you've not seen, son. Clara ain't no joke," he muttered, his rheumy eyes glaring at Jake's amusement. "Those woods, they ain't safe after dusk." Jake left the diner later that evening, the setting sun casting long, seeking shadows that coiled around the desolate buildings. The legends of Clara and the haunting laughter echoing within the woods were mere fairy tales to him. Little did he know that soon he was to venture into the heart of these tales, where reality would blur and his skepticism would face its most chilling test. The whispered warnings that the woods and Clara were closely entwined filled the chilly air, forming a spectral voice that haunted his steps. Shivering not from the cold, but from anticipation, Jake decided to confront the legend head-on, unknowing of the twisted path he was about to tread. As the townsfolk retreated into their warm homes and the night drew its dark veil over Mapleton, the eerie quiet it brought along seemed to carry a warning. Clara was awaiting her latest visitor. Equipped with little more than a flashlight and a flannel jacket to ward off the chill of the late autumn night, Jake ventured forth towards the dense rim of the surrounding woods. Twilight had spread its eerie luminescence over the sleepy hamlet of Mapleton, and in the soft glow of dying sunlight, Jake crossed a familiar trampled path into the unexplored abyss of towering trees and undulating shadows. The once pastel-colored sky was now immersed in an inky canvas dotted with radiant stars. The tree branches clung onto the darkness like hands outstretched from a forgotten past, whispering tales of lost time into his twitching ears belonging to a man undeterred by his youthful invincibility. He traversed deeper into the woods, listening to the symphony of the night, the crickets chirping their incessant song as the wind played harmonies through the rustling trees. The compact, meandering trails had given way to a denser morass of towering timber and thick underbrush. Just as the trails looked alien, and he began questioning his pursuit, he heard it. A sigh. It was so soft, bordering on surreal, that he initially dismissed it as the murmur of the wind. But then it grew louder, richer, and overwhelmingly human. A whisper, feminine and melodic, it snaked through the rustling leaves and filled the silence hanging in the chilling air. A rigid surge of concern shot through him, and he flicked on his flashlight, trying to pierce the veil of night. Beads of cold sweat dotted his forehead as his heart pounded in unruly tempo. The single beam of his flashlight was a lonely ray amidst the cloaked darkness. "Hello? Is anybody there?" he called out, his voice more steady than he felt, bouncing off the trees and back at him. The silhouettes of gnarled trunks appeared and disappeared in the bobbing light, but no answer came to his call. Only the echo of his voice filled the air, humming a familiar tune of solitude on this otherwise desolate trail. Gradually, he felt the world around him pause, the very air seeming to hold its breath as his flashlight began to flicker. It stumbled and gasped in fits and starts, battling against the darkness. That's when he saw it. A flicker too different from the ones his flashlight made, piercing the darkness but in a softer, unearthly way. The spectral figure of a woman stood under the rough arch of an ancient maple tree, her image wavering, fragile, like an ephemeral painting caught in the throes of a tempest. She appeared to be dressed in white, her details obscured under the imperfection of the dying light. Then, before his mind could even begin grasping the scene, Clara vanished. The hazy outline that once held her presence seemed to mock him. He blinked hard, wondering if his eyes deceived him, if the tales whispered in the diner had played tricks on his mind. A chill ran down his spine, freezing his blood. His once bravado now faced a real, chilling challenge. Reality and the tales he dismissed bled into each other, blurring the lines of what he knew to be true. And just as swiftly as it began, the first encounter with Clara, the ghostly enigma of the Whispering Woods, ended, leaving Jake alone with his racing thoughts. After the spooky encounter, Jake returned to the unassuming solace of the diner, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The locals sitting perched on the counter stools glanced up as he shambled in, the door jingling in his wake. A chorus of whispers rose along with the smell of stale coffee, and suddenly the room was thick with barely concealed curiosity. Bianca, a feisty, middle-aged woman with streaks of silver in her hair, who also happened to run the local diner, handed him a steaming mug of coffee. "Met Clara, did you?" she inquired, a knowing wink gleaming in her eye. Jake found himself sharing the strange tale of the evening, the laughter, the figure of the woman under the old maple tree, the vanishing. He expected chiding or mockery, but was met with solemn nods, as the fizzling neon lights cast shadow puppetry on the worn-out walls of the diner. The story was far too familiar to warrant disbelief. Bianca, leaning on the counter, drying a mug with an old towel, her eyes seemingly 1,000 miles away, sighed. "Ever heard of the story of Mapleton's tragic love?" she asked. An unspoken permission for her to narrate the lore. She began, voice soft yet firm. "Clara was a captivating beauty, and a soul of the woods. Loved this land, she did. More than anything except Joey. Childhood friends they were, and as they grew older, so did their love. They planned on leaving Mapleton, to see the world and carve out their place under the sun. Yet fate had planned otherwise." Pausing to refill her mug, she continued. "An accident had taken Joey away. Clara was devastated, much like the rest of us. Few weeks after Joey's death, Clara disappeared. Some said she couldn't bear the pain, others believed she went looking for him. All we truly know is she was heard and seen only after sundown, wandering through the woods she once roamed with Joey." Jake sat there, absorbing the story. The dim-lit diner faded away, and he was transported to that time, to feel the love that blossomed and the despair that ensued. He could almost envisage Clara, a desolate figure in the very woods where he'd met her specter. His cynical city instinct wanted to refute, but the evidence laid bare before him was hard to ignore. Something inside of him swelled, a stirring mix of compassion and intrigue. Perhaps it was Clara's tragedy that sparked his empathy, or the undying mystery that titillated his curiosity. Jake found himself tangled in this forgotten tale. The once skeptical city dweller was beginning to believe, and now he wanted to help. "Is there a way to help her?" he asked, catching Bianca by surprise. Setting down her mug and leaning in closer, her face hardened by years of sorrow turned soft with concern. "You sure you want to meddle, son? Some things are." She paused, her gaze unfocused, looking past Jake as if reminiscing an old memory. Better left to rest. But Jake was already lost in the jigsaw puzzle of Clara's existence, determined to bring resolution to her wandering soul. The echoes of lost love resounded in his ears, echoing his quest through the ethereal plane. Mornings in Mapleton take on a leisurely pace, as though time itself bows before the quaint town's unhurried rhythm. Yet for Jake, The chirping birds and crawling daylight came with a sense of purpose. Eating a hastily prepared breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs, he set out, carrying only a small backpack, a flashlight, and an insatiable curiosity dubbed as bravery. His first stop was the local library. The building, a relic from the Victorian era, was a mishmash of Gothic architecture and modern renovation, much like the town itself. Miss Mary, the town's librarian and historian, was Jake's target as he hoped to glean more knowledge about Clara. Nestled amid dusty books and arcane transcripts, Miss Mary was a relic of yesteryears. Her face was a web of wrinkles, eyes sparkling with wisdom, and her finger caressed the rim of her specs resting on a worn-out book. The aura around her a testament to the many tales she held within her. Jake explained his peculiar encounter and inquired about Clara. Miss Mary's once smiling face transformed into an unreadable mask as she listened. A deep breath later saw her rising from her chair with a creak, disappearing into the labyrinthine stacks of antique books that snaked around the corners of the library. Upon her return, she placed a battered, leather-bound diary onto the aged mahogany desk. It seemed like an artifact that had been pulled from the very annals of time. This diary. She paused, a melancholic expression casting a shadow on her features. Belonged to Clara. Jake stared at the faded pages filled with the soft, looping handwriting. Transferring projections of the young girl's thoughts, dreams, and her love for Joey were etched into these pages. If you want to help, boy. Miss Mary's deep voice resonated in the otherwise silent library. Start here. Hours turned into days as Jake read, the diary serving as a beacon, offering insights into the sorrowful love story. Clara's voice found echo in the handwritten notes, resembling a forgotten sonnet of a love so profound, and a misery equally harrowing. Armed with intimate knowledge of Clara's life, her favorite places in the woods, and the scent of her lingering sorrow in the yellowed pages, Jake began to map out a plan. He braved the twilight, returned under the bleak maple tree, and patiently awaited the whispering ghost of Clara. As darkness crept in once again, under the gnarled branches of the age-old tree, the soft whisper transformed into a melancholic song. And just like before, the spectral figure of Clara stood elusive in the dreamy moonlight under the tree, a tragic silhouette lost in time. But this time, she didn't vanish. Perhaps, it was his newfound understanding of her world that held her there, a beacon of unresolved longing amidst the enveloping darkness. The evening chill pricked his skin as Jake mustered the courage to step forward. Eyeing the spectral silhouette, he took a deep, quivering breath, throwing whispers into the wind. Clara? The whispering ceased abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves as Clara slowly turned towards him. The moonlight bounced off her spectral form, creating an etheric iridescence around her. Jake flinched, half expecting her to vanish yet again. Instead, she stayed, her translucent eyes keenly observing him. For a moment, they held a silent conversation, the air around them thick with unuttered words and anxiety. "I'm here to help," Jake managed to say, breaking the silence. He retold the tragic tale, as he had heard from Bianca, read from the diary. Clara listened, her forlorn eyes revealing nothing. "I read your diary, Clara," he gently added. "I felt your love for Joey, your sorrow. I want to help you find peace." A reaction, subtle yet unfathomable, flickered across Clara's spectral face. A gust of wind, raw and cold, swept through the place. It seemed for a moment that Clara's spectral form wavered, fluttered, but then it stabilized, a demeanor of calm replacing her melancholic expression. "Peace?" Her voice echoed gently, carrying a timbre of forgotten hopes. "How can one bring peace when the pieces of the heart lie scattered across time, Jake?" Jake hesitated for the shortest of instants before he found himself slightly nodding. He understood her quandary, her eternal suffering. It was wrong to expect a clear-cut solution when dealing with matters of the heart, especially when loss and time had severely tampered with those matters. "Perhaps the pieces of your heart are indeed scattered, Clara, but are scattered within this very land that you loved so dearly. Joey might be gone, yet his love, his spirit, continues to exist here. And so does yours," Jake said, his words merging the logic of the living with the sentiments of the spectral. A pregnant pause ensued, as Clara stood there, contemplating Jake's words while he held his breath, waiting for her reaction. The moonlight streaming down, casting long gloomy shadows across the woods, creating a surrealistic palette for their unusual conversation. "If you are willing, I could help you search for the scattered pieces, Clara," Jake softly offered. "Maybe we could remind you of the love that still exists here." Was there an echo of surprise in Clara's spectral gaze? Or was it anticipation? Jake couldn't discern. But in the eerie silence of that midnight encounter, he felt the first tangible connection. And for the first time, instead of the echoes of lost love, there seemed to be a whisper of hope vibrating through the ethereal plane. After his midnight meeting with Clara, Jake's days took on a definite purpose. He would receive coded instructions in the form of memories gushed from Clara, speaking of her favorite places, attaching emotions and memories. Each day was a new location: the small elite hill that offered a stunning panorama of Mapleton, the serene banks of the slow-flowing river where daisies bloomed, or the abandoned orchard that was cloaked with the scent of ripe apples during fall. One such location was a rickety old wooden bench overlooking a crystalline lake. Not just any bench, it was their bench, Clara's and Joey's. Hidden beneath the giant willow's melancholic green veils was a spot where love had blossomed and secrets were shared. Jake could almost perceive the ghosts of their laughter carried by the wind and the imprints of their love in the aged wood. This was where Clara had fallen more in love, where Joey had whispered sweet sonnets into her ears. Upon reaching the spot, Jake perceived an undeniable power, a spectral warmth otherworldly in origin. As if the weathered bench held within it a time capsule of the cherished memories of a love so potent, it transcended the boundaries of life and death. The trek to such locations was a communion with a long-lost era, a passage through time for him. But more than that, it marked a journey of a spirit gaining closure, finding the pieces of her shattered heart, and basking, even if momentarily, in the golden glow of her forgotten love. Jake became the living bridge between the spectral and the physical, between Clara's ethereal existence and the lingering memories buried within Mapleton's heart. As Jake continued this pattern, something changed in Clara. Her spectral image became less misty, more formed, infused with a subtle luminescence. She even laughed once, a sound so light and delicate that it sent chills down Jake's spine. This was progress, he thought, a hope-filled indication that they were on the right path. Amid these singular experiences, Jake found himself evolving too. He was no longer the outsider in Mapleton. He, too, was becoming a part of the town's history, tethered to its people and its stories. Yet, the question remained, was it enough? Could revisiting memories bring peace to a heart that was eternally shattered? The spectral figure of love-struck Clara held the answer, wrapped within the deepest chambers of her ethereal heart. As they stood under the gnarled branches of the age-old tree one starlit evening, their quests interconnected, they gazed at each other, a spectral girl lost in time and a young man committed to helping her find peace. Uncertain of the outcome but hopeful of a resolution. In the subsequent days, Jake and Clara delved deeper into the past. Each place, each memory, was a step towards reassembling the hauntingly beautiful mosaic of Clara's lost love. Jake could see the spectral light that composed Clara's form gradually grow brighter, yet something felt incomplete. For every fragment of love they unearthed, the specter of loss shadowed it. One day, they found themselves standing before an old wooden box in the attic of the dilapidated Mapleton mansion. A sense of unspoken longing hung in the dust-choked air, permeating the neglected room. As Jake reached for the box, a rush of memories seemingly flooded into Clara's spectral form. The box was full of letters Joey had written to Clara, each word encased in a swath of longing, of unrestrained love. Clara, inundated with an overload of emotions, flickered in her brightness. They spent the afternoon deciphering the textured script, the fragile sheets of paper almost crumbling under Jake's fingers. Each letter was like a puzzle piece, revealing more about the love that Joey and Clara shared, recreating a montage of their romance that time had tried to erase. Days passed this way with the spectral anomaly of Clara revealing more and more about her past life. However, Jake observed there was a persistent shadow, a lingering darkness that Clara shied away from, one memory that she refused to address. One night, Jake confronted her under the vast, star-studded sky. "Clara, what aren't you telling me?" he asked, his tone gentle yet firm. Clara stared at him, her spectral eyes wavering, then looked away. "The day Joey left," she said, her voice barely a whisper yet reverberating eerily, making the silence feel alive. "We need to face it, Clara," Jake gently pushed. "It's the last piece. Without it, you can never be whole." It was the turning point in their shared quest. Clara, with a sigh that resembled the wind stricken with melancholy, finally agreed. As they prepared to step into that fateful memory, a sense of foreboding encased them. Was this the missing piece that could finally mend Clara's spectral heart, or was it a Pandora's box that could unearth unbearable pain? The answers lay dangling in the vulnerable divide between the past and the present. As the clock of the old Mapleton church struck the midnight hour, they plunged into the memory. The day Joey left, their hearts beating in unison for two different, yet interconnected causes. Clara, hoping to find her peace, and Jake, determined to bridge the divide between the spectral and the living. It was a gloomy day in Mapleton's memory, the sky an oppressive canvas of gray, the air heavy with the scent of an impending storm. This day, though long past, felt fresh and immediate as they stepped into the memory. Clara had always been effervescent, spreading her energy and vitality wherever she went. But that day was different. A sense of dread sat heavily upon her spectral shoulders, mirroring in her expression. As she led Jake to Mapleton's central square, he could feel the energy around them changing, an impending echo of an event that forever changed the course. When they arrived at the square, Clara froze, her spectral figure shimmering with visible tension. At the center stood a 19th-century carriage, horses saddled and ready. A crowd had gathered to bid farewell. Among the villagers stood Joey, the object of everyone's adoration and Clara's undying love, preparing to leave Mapleton for an unknown destination. As Jake observed the tableau, Joey's gaze met Clara's, causing obvious distress in the onlooking spectral woman. Even as an observer of memories, Jake could feel Joey's pain and Clara's despair wrapped tightly around the moment. "Why did he leave, Clara?" Jake asked, voicing the question that had been lingering in his mind for weeks. In response, the air around Clara thickened as if the atmosphere itself felt the heaviness of her heart. It took a few moments before Clara could muster her answer, her voice so frail it was almost lost within the howling wind. "He had to," Clara began, spectral tears glistening in her eyes. "His family was in debt. An opportunity came from the city. He had to leave to save everyone he loved, including me." She paused, trying to regain her composure. "But I never got to say goodbye. He left before I arrived." She trailed off, her final words barely a whisper against the chilling winds. Jake looked at Clara, his heart aching for the spectral woman who had loved so deeply and lost so abruptly. This was the unresolved pain, the unfinished goodbye, and the bitterness of a love cut short. As they stood there, lost in Joey's departure, Jake understood what needed to be done. It was time to bring proper closure to Clara's tale. It was time for their paths to diverge, yet within this divergence, they would find the convergence they had been seeking. Jake spent the night wrestling with his thoughts, wrestling with the painful memories of Clara. Morning dawned, bringing with it a resolve that Jake had lacked until this moment. He finally understood his mission and its purpose. It was time for Clara's farewell that history had forgotten. Preparations for the day began with an uncharacteristic solemnity. Jake reached out to the townsfolk, who were more than willing to help once they understood the purpose. They began working, painting, designing, and even cooking. It wasn't a festival, either a celebration, rather a remembrance, a reckoning of lost love. As the sun began to set, Mapleton's central square was lit by 100 lanterns. A full recreation of Joey's departure, but with one crucial difference. This time, Clara would get to say her goodbyes. Dressed in period-appropriate attire, Jake assumed the role of Joey with stunning accuracy while Clara, radiant in her spectral glow, stood out among the crowd. As they stood in the square, under the soft glow of lanterns with the entire town watching, Jake felt centuries colliding. History repeating itself with a gentle twist, unfurling a path for Clara's redemption and release. Jake stepped down from his carriage, emulating Joey's aura. The crowd, including spectral Clara, moved aside to form a pathway. He took Clara's spectral hand, lost in his act yet conscious of the implications of his words. Looking into her eyes, he said the words Clara had yearned to hear for centuries. "I must leave, Clara, for reasons beyond us. But you live in my heart, now and forever." He recited the planned speech. Clara's glow flickered in response. Disbelief and relief spread across her spectral face. Jake continued, "Our love will live on, beyond this physical plane. And one day, somehow, we will find each other again." Tears streamed down Clara's ethereal face. "Thank you, Joey," she whispered, her words echoing around the town square. Her glow began to shift, becoming more ethereal, more intangible. She looked at Jake one last time, her gaze filled with gratitude for the living man who had bridged the spectral divide. And then, in a flash of brilliant light, she disappeared, finally at peace. The crowd burst into applause, breaking the silence of the emotional farewell. Jake, standing in the middle of the square, felt a surge of relief and satisfaction, intermingled with a sense of loss. He had grown to cherish Clara's spectral presence, yet knew she needed to be free. There were no fireworks that night, no extravagant celebration. Instead, the townspeople of Mapleton stood around silent, each lost in the poignancy of the moment. History was rectified that night as Clara found her much-needed farewell. The spectral anomaly of Mapleton had found her peace. For Jake, it was victory and loss at once, having completed his mission and lost a friend. The existential divide that had kept Clara bound was no more, as Mapleton found itself at peace. With the break of dawn, Mapleton was stirred into its usual routine. There was an unexpected stillness in the air, a sense of calm that belied the emotional turbulence of the previous night. Clara's absence was palpable, and yet, strangely, her presence felt more profound than ever in the peaceful tranquility of the town. Jake woke up that morning feeling lighter, yet wound into the twine of melancholy. As he walked through the town that had been his home for the past few months, nostalgia mixed with an odd sense of solitariness. The spectral lady of Mapleton, Clara, who had been his companion in this journey and his mission, was now gone, absorbed back into the annals of history where she belonged. Concluding his time in Mapleton, Jake packed his bags, and with one last longing sweep across the town, he stepped onto the bus out of town. As the town's panorama receded in the distance, he couldn't help but recall his spectral encounters with Clara. Meanwhile, life in Mapleton returned back to normalcy. Children played, adults worked, and old people gossiped. Clara's absence was noticed by those who had grown used to her spectral figure, yet they continued with their lives, inevitably accepting the changes. But every so often, on cool autumn evenings, they would pause, gazing at the central square, feeling her presence in the quiet gentleness of the breeze. The culmination of Jake's quest wasn't just about his own personal growth, it had brought closure to an entire town. The spectral lady's tale was no longer of heartbreak and despair. Instead, it had transformed into a narrative of eternal love and hope. For Mapleton, Clara was not merely a resolved mystery, but a part of their shared history, forever enshrined in the heart of the community. Back in his own home, Jake found himself viewing life through a new lens. His connection with Clara had opened his eyes to the unseen dimensions of life. His exploration into the spectral plane had given him precious insights into the interconnection of past, present, and future. Though he continued with his paranormal investigations, the experience with Clara left an indelible mark on his soul. Often, he would catch himself staring off into distance, a soft smile playing on his lips as he remembered the spectral lady. Her tale served as a poignant reminder that human connections transcended planes of existence. Jake's only hope was that his interventions had helped Clara find her peace, carve the path towards the light, thus orchestrating the finale of their intertwined journey. Clara's tale had started as an anomaly, a mystery to decipher, but it ended as an enduring tale of love, loss, and unspoken goodbyes. And thus ended the journey of the spectral Lady of Mapleton, living on as a heartwarming whisper of history, in the wide world of the living and the unseen.